Okay, good evening. This is the April 28th, hard to believe, April 28th meeting of the Charter Committee. Tonight we're going to review our charter draft to date and then start into the town administrator, town manager discussion with the help of our friends from Collins. And then we've got some approve the minutes and look at the tracker document and talk about emails and some other things at the end there. So if you want to start out, Anthony and Mel? You want to get us going?
Sure. What I'll do first is I'll go over the charter to date, and then I'll turn over to Mel for a discussion on the executive authority section. There's really only two major changes to the charter thus far. So let me start with the smaller one first. So the smaller one is there was some discussion or some potential confusion about the moderator's authority relative to how the town meeting is run. So if you look at section 2-7, there's a slight change to that, to the first line there, which is the town meeting may, by bylaw or decision of the moderator, adopt rules to govern the conduct of the town meeting. That first sentence. The intention was not to take any authority away from the moderator, just to sort of specify what rules the town meeting was using. And so that was to really sort of make that explicit. And then sort of the more substantive change is the committee wanted options as to the timing of the town meeting, particularly the dual town meetings in spring or fall. And so I provided some options. One thing that I would just point out as to option one with regard to the sort of the fall and the spring town meeting. As you look at, I just threw some sort of general timeframes in here. I think that there have been a question about sort of a drop dead date. Because it's supposed to be the fall or the second town meeting, you really wanted to have your sort of your brackets so that your second town meeting can't overlap your sort of first town meeting. For example, if we only said the second town meeting shall be before, November 1st of the year, in theory, you could set it up to sort of bump up to the first town meeting. So you sort of want to bracket it that this section of the year is dedicated for this meeting and that section of the year is dedicated to the other. But again, two options. One was sort of a time period that it could happen over, and the other option was to sort of specify the week of the month that it would be that it would occur. So with that, I'll sort of turn it over to the committee for discussion. But those were the two changes based on last meeting's discussion.
Okay, Anthony, I thought we were going to see new options because the first one I think also needs to say it's not the first week of May, it's the first week of May with the Monday in there, like the bylaws say now. I could add the bylaws say the week of the first Monday in May. Right.
I thought it was simpler just to say the first week of May.
Now the problem is that it's not the same, because if it could be April 29th or whatever it is. April 30th could be Monday, and that we don't want that. They want it to be the first full week.
I can definitely change it the week of the week of the first Monday in May.
Right.
I can make that change. No, we can do that right now.
Yeah, we could look at the election at first.
Yeah. What's that? The election has to come after, right? Regardless, yeah. And then, so then option two then here, I thought we were going to see an update because this one doesn't make sense the way it is right now. Right, because it's saying the Springtown meeting will be held the second week in November, so I don't think that's right.
Oh,
I'm not sure what option two is supposed to tell us here.
No, that's a typo. So yeah, it was. So that's for the fall town meeting, and then that should be moved up to the first option, and the second option should be would be the 4 months. The 4 months at the beginning of the calendar year. For the second option was going to be the 2 calendar months. So my apology. The second week of November. So let me share my screen. So you're correct. So this option
Okay, so that's been corrected. Well,
Should be here.
Can't see it now because of that. Shall be, how many should be held? But we don't want to say the second week of November. We definitely don't want to say that. That's way too constricted for fall town meeting, right?
Yeah,
that-
I think
that
it's too much
fluctuates
of
way
a,
more, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So then the second option would be just in the last 4 months of the calendar year? I know one other charter
They're
I
not-
thought said had to be like between September 1st and November 18th or something like that. I don't,
Yeah, I mean, December's got to be out of the question, because you've got to,
I get too many other things going on.
yeah, the
Right.
tax bills have to go out, you know, you
Yeah,
can't,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. So, yeah, November 15th is probably a good cutoff, you know.
yeah. Okay.
I like it.
You like that better? Agree? We're talking about the fall town meeting, rather than saying the last 4 months of the year?
Yeah,
Say it
when-
has to be before November.
November 15th or something.
Or even make it a little bit later in case something comes up, you know, that for some reason we're waiting on something for a special town meeting, maybe it's not coming until the 18th, maybe, do you want to say the 15th, or just,
Or say the 20, or say November. Because it's not gonna happen, Thanksgiving and all that stuff anyway, but,
That week, yeah, it's
Just say
going to
November?
be a no-go. After that town meeting, the board has to have a tax classification hearing, usually within a week or two,
that's right.
to set the tax rate, and then to get the bills
okay.
processed for December. So
I was
it,
gonna say I would have known that.
so it's, you know, late November, early December, it's too late, really, and you're not going to get your tax bills out on time.
So do you think the 15th is fine?
Yeah, and that might even be a little late, you know, but it gives them the option of, you know, if there's not an election, they could have it the first week in November, or, you know, earlier than that. I mean, we sometimes have the end of
Anytime earlier
October.
than that, yeah.
Yeah, this year, there's no state
So would it ever
election.
be before October? Could it be in September?
It could be that the argument's always, oh, people just got back to school and it's
Right,
too
right,
early,
right.
you know, and that's why August is never a town meeting.
All right, so we'll
Month
say
and-
between September and the middle of November, September 1st and November 15th?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, that gives you a
Hey,
couple of,
Anthony, everybody else good with that? Did you hear that,
Yeah.
Anthony? I was gonna say,
I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing. but
okay,
I
so we're
think what I
saying
heard
for the
is
fall town
wanted
meeting,
to-
we want the fall town meeting for it to say between September 1st and November 15th.
Between September 1st and November, you said November 15th?
15th.
Yeah, November 15th. So you're going with option one, but you want to
Yes.
change the second week to between the 1st and the 15th. The 1st of September and the 15th of November.
Yes,
Is that correct?
yes, yes.
Okay, I will make those changes.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Do you have something else, Tim?
I
No,
do,
go ahead.
I do. You know, I'm like a dog with a bone with this timing of town meeting thing. I mean, I think since I've been moderator, we've always had a annual town meeting in the spring and a fall special town meeting, and that goes back almost 20 years. And I think, you know, in all reality, the board is always going to call a special town meeting in the fall, because they've got tax, you know, they've got budget issues, and they've got things that just can't wait till the next, you know, the following May.
Right.
So it in a way, we're tying the board's hands, saying you must call a town meeting, you know, by the end of the year, by November. And I maintain it's still inaccurate to say we're going to have two sessions of the annual town meeting.
It doesn't specifically say that. It says, well, it does say the second meeting, yeah.
Yeah, and well, the general laws say that the annual town meeting happens between February and June in every town in the Commonwealth. And the select board can call a special town meeting at any other time of the year that they want to. So as long as we're clear that, I don't mind doing two town meetings a year, but as long as we're clear that the annual meeting happens once a year and it's in the spring, and we're going to have a standing special town meeting in the fall, I can live with that, but we can't call it like a bifurcated annual town meeting. There's no, I think town council would say that too, that's not what the general laws say, that you have to have the annual in the spring. Every town does. And, and I think we're going to have a special town meeting in the fall, whether we have it in the charter or not. I mean, it's been that way for years. I think even, before I was involved, I think it was always, I mean, Al, you know, there's always been a,
Such,
1980, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the fall town meeting is busier than the
Yeah.
spring town meeting. So sometimes it's gotten like, but anyway, Rob, you had something you wanted to add?
Mel's hands up.
Oh, okay. Mel?
Sure. Well, it's true that the general laws require the annual town meeting. There are charters, and the charter is a special act of the legislature that does vary that and creates this required spring session of an annual town meeting. And, you know, we're not advocating that you do that or not, and we acknowledge that you've been having these meetings regardless, but many communities have that in their charter. Some communities have that in their charter. And we would make sure we had the right language that would pass muster of council or the legislative council, if that's what you want.
I thought there was some advantage to declaring the fall meeting as an annual meeting versus a special meeting. I thought it eased some restriction or timeline, that there was a more onerous timeline or something associated with a special meeting?
Yeah, my recollection is there's different set of procedures or notifications associated with the term special meeting. I'm all for the concept, as we've discussed previously, of 2 meetings, now terminology being spring and fall, in order to conform to one set of meetings in which it's stipulated that we're going to have 2. Don't need to call it special for the reason I just stated, and the fact that we've got 10 years of experience that the town has held 2, and I think in the most recent annual report of the town, there's a statement of projected to have 2 again for the coming year, and sure enough, we're gonna have them, so.
I think Mel also, I think you also offered one time, Mel, that you really did, the difference between the annual and the special wasn't anything significant for the most part. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is a certain petition, there are higher petition requirements for a special, both for calling a special outside of the select board and also for the number of signatures required.
But in terms of what we can do, the business that we can do at a special versus an annual, are there differences to that?
I don't think they're significant, you know, you can still
Okay.
appropriate money, you can approve contracts, you can do all that stuff.
Okay, so it's really just the notification stuff and okay,
In terminology.
Yeah.
terminology.
One, I think, are we
All
changing?
right, I just like to make a decision on this, move forward, because I don't think it's really that significant either way. We just got to decide what we're going to put in and move on, right?
Yeah. Well, I think as far as the notice, I think we were going to change it to 14 days anyway. I mean, it's 7 days notice for the annual
Right,
town
right,
meeting and
right.
14 for any
Right,
special.
and I think that's already been changed.
We thought, yeah, that the
So then it's just a
longer
matter, do
notice
we
was
want to
better.
say in here that there will be the second meeting? And it seems like we do it every year. It seems like it would be worth, to me, I'm okay with it being in here, that there is a second meeting. So it says the annual town meeting shall be, oh, it says right here, we'll meet twice each calendar year. That's the issue. So, I mean, all right, so if we got away from that, if we just said the annual town meeting will be in the spring, and then there will be a second meeting in the fall, but we don't call the second one an annual town meeting, does that make people feel better? I mean, because it sounds like
You
everything
call
else
it
is
the
the same
fall.
anyway.
You can call it the fall town meeting.
The fall town meeting, right.
You can still call them spring and fall. It's just the one in the spring, it serves as the annual.
Does that get you the benefits associated with having declaring this to be a second annual meeting?
I think what I just heard, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So there's certain different notice requirements with an annual meeting. If we don't call it an annual meeting, do we get those benefits of those lesser or different notice requirements? And Anthony, what you mentioned?
So in section 2-5, the next section underneath this one, you've set the notice requirements for in this case, it would really apply to both meetings, which is that copies of the warrants will be sort of placed around town at least 5 days before the meeting, and I'm sorry, copies of the warrant will be placed at least 14 days prior to the meeting in 5 locations around town. So you've set those notice requirements. Those are more there's more time under those requirements than would be under state law for a regular town meeting. I think some of the reason for that during the conversation with the committee was sort of just to allow more time for citizens to know about it. So the committee's already decided that they want to allow more time for notice for these meetings.
So Article 2, now that you mentioned that, Article 2 talks about things about a town meeting. It says who the presiding officer will be, its location. I guess the question is, do we want those provisions to apply to both of these meetings? If both of these meetings will be in fact regular and ongoing and mandatory, or not special meetings?
Who are you asking the question to?
No one,
Just
the assembled masses.
Okay.
Well, they're all town meetings.
Right.
So
Yeah,
those are
yes.
the elements that apply.
So why don't we
to
call them town meetings? A spring town meeting and a fall town meeting?
Because you have to have an annual town meeting, right? The state says you have
That's
to have
what
an annual.
that was my question.
Right.
Is there a distinction with a town meeting, and do we need to call the fall meeting a town meeting?
So, Mel sort of already touched on this. So this is a special act, which, sort of by definition allows for some deviation from state law. So you're asking the legislature to pass a law. The charter will be a law that applies specifically to Littleton. And so in the charter that will apply to Littleton, again, this is a trend that's happening around the state, you'll have two regular, I guess I would sort of call them two regular annual meetings, one in the spring, one in the fall. We can, again, I hear this thing about the sort of nomenclature. I think some of it might be addressed if we deleted that first sentence, and then the paragraph would read, we might have to do this manually, but it could read, the first meeting, which will be the Springtown meeting, shall be held the week of the first Monday in May on a date and time which is to be determined by the select board. The second meeting shall be held, the fall town meeting shall be held between the first day of September and the 15th day of November, again, on a date to be determined by the select board. So if I'm hearing the conversation correctly, it's really some concern about this first sentence and maybe using the word regular.
It's the same, I think the concern is having two annual town meetings. That just doesn't seem to, yeah.
You could almost just take the word annual out.
Right.
And
That's what
it
yeah.
would read fine.
Right, just take the word annual out of the first sentence. The town meeting shall meet in regular session twice in each calendar year, and then it goes on from there.
And I think,
Yeah.
between September and November 15th,
Yep.
and we got it.
So yes,
Okay,
if that's all about it, I'd make that change, yes.
all right. Anything else we need, anybody else have any questions or concerns about what's in here right now? Okay. So you'll get us an update on that, and we can review it one more time next meeting?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
With that, I will gladly turn over to Mel, who's done an excellent memo on executive authority. Mel, do you want me to share it, or do you just want to talk to me?
No, I don't think so. I think the committee members have the memo. What I would like to do is very generally summarize the memo, talk a little bit about the Department of Revenue report that you also hopefully received, and then talk a little bit about how we're going to go from, just talking about it to actually making some decisions in a charter. So I think the first thing is that executive authority in Massachusetts towns, it's all the same. It's the select board. The select board is the elected, chief elected board in every town of Massachusetts. And that select board has executive authority.
Okay, excuse me, Mel,
unless-
I'm sorry, Mel, can you show it so people at home can see this also?
Certainly,
Thank
of
you.
course, thank you. Anthony, could you please post that memo?
You're a savior.
My error, your benefit.
Thank you, Anthony. So we're talking about the first section of this memo, which is executive authority, and my point was that in all towns, the select board, the elected select board is the executive authority. Now, the board shares this authority with other independently elected boards and officials, and that varies in different towns. One thing that is the same in all towns is that there's an elected school committee that has some very independent legal authority in Massachusetts. And so typically, charters don't extend into that school committee authority when they're talking about executive authority for the town. Now, what we've been mostly talking about, and the report talks about, is how does the select board share that executive and administrative authority with an appointed position. And as local government has gotten more complicated, I would say most towns in Massachusetts have some appointed position that assists the select board and has some authority to manage the affairs, the daily affairs of the town. Generally speaking, those appointed positions are known as town manager or town administrator, although those have evolved over the years. But currently, where we're at today, those typically are the two titles that are used for that position. Just go up just a little bit more, Anthony. Where communities have adopted these positions, they created these positions, they've done so either through their home rule charter authority or by a special act, like we're talking about today, and this committee has been charged with considering, or they do it as a bylaw under the general authority of Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 23A. And by the way, that's how we believe the town of Littleton has created, that's the authority that Littleton has to create the existing bylaw that it has for the town administrator position. Now, I want to clarify that the position titles of town manager and town administrator have no legal basis. They just don't. There is no official description of those positions. In general and historically, the position of town manager has been created mostly through charter and special acts. And it's implied, I think, to many people that the town manager has more authority than the position of town administrator, but that's not always the case. In fact, it's not the case in many places. And so what you need to do is you decide what you want to call it, for whatever reason you may want to call it that. And your charter, the provisions, specific charter provisions, will really define the strength and weakness of that position. And that's the next section I want to talk about. But before I do that, I open it up to any questions.
Okay, thank you. Move on.
Okay, so we talk about these positions as weak versus strong, and I want to be clear that it has no relationship to the incumbents on either the select board or the town administrator or the town manager. Weak versus strong really implies the level of independent executive authority that the select board shares with that position, of the appointed position. By its nature, the bylaw that is created in Littleton by Chapter 41, Section 23A, by its very nature, it's a weak position. It does not give the authority of sharing executive power. It really exists on behalf of the select board. And really, I guess we'll go up just a little bit, Anthony. I just want to see the, yeah, right there. And so really, the way in which to define whether a position is weak versus strong really relates to these four items that are in the bulleted points. One, and the most, I think, important, is the appointment and removal of department heads and other employees of the town. That ranges from, frankly, doing it themselves and informing the select board, or sometimes making the appointment and having only the select board could veto the appointment, to really making just recommendations and having the select board approve those recommendations or appointments. So there's quite a range of appointment authority, and that is a major factor of weak versus strong. Another is contracting for goods and services. So obviously the town contracts for many goods and services, from materials, public works materials, to services in the assessing department or in the library or what have you. And the nature of the town administrator's authority to make those contracts and to execute those contracts are key to the authority. The third, and probably the second most important, is the preparing and recommending the annual budget. The annual budget is the most important policy tool that the town has each year, creates a lot of priorities within it, and obviously has a lot to do with the tax impacts and facility and services that are provided to the residents of the town. And so the ability of the town administrator to not only prepare and compile the budget, but also to recommend it, whether that be to the finance committee, the select board, or that would be the two areas that they would recommend that budget to, is very critical to the authority. And then finally, the control and use of municipal property and facilities. Generally, that's a select board responsibility, although that can be shared with certainly the school committee and other elected bodies. And many times it's a function that's given to the town manager or town administrator to handle that. I already mentioned that the title town manager historically implies stronger authority, but again, it really has no legal impact. So you have a bylaw. We mentioned that before. It's created by authority of the general laws. I want to point out a few things. You have the bylaw, I believe, available. It is chapter 3 of your bylaws. It's called Town Administrator. I would point out a couple of things here. Again, it's generally a weak position because of the nature of its authority under the general laws as opposed to a charter or a special act. And I thought it's interesting, this position in Littleton is not given authority to appoint or supervise all the department heads under the select board. The police and fire departments, chiefs specifically are excluded from that. The town administrator approves the appointment of all employees under the jurisdiction of the select board, except for the police and fire, but is limited to just providing input into the hiring of other employees under other independent boards and committees. And we talked a little bit about the budget authority, and this was discussed extensively in the DOR report. It's not clear to the extent to which the town administrator is given responsibility for actually making recommendations around the budget. Now, in communities like Littleton that do not have detailed bylaws or charters, often the authority of the town administrator is supplemented or created through the use of informal arrangements. We often call them memorandum agreements that the select board, the town administrator, perhaps the library trustees might enter into in order to handle the use of maintenance of the library facility, for example. Around the budget, there could be an understanding between the finance committee and the select board, the school committee, that this is the way we're going to handle it. This is what we want the town administrator to do, and they'll put that in writing. The issues with these informal agreements or traditions or policies is they don't have any legal effect other than the willingness of the parties at the time to enter into those. So as town administrators change, the select board members change, finance committee members change, there could be different ways to handle these various arrangements, and the authority that was given to one town administrator to be taken away to another one. So what we often at the Collins Center suggest, and I think the Department of Revenue is suggesting, is regardless of how you're going to share that authority, it should be written. And that's what a charter or a special act creates. And so Obviously, this is a very important section of your charter, probably the most important section, because not only are you talking about the town administrator, but you're really talking about the select board and also other independently elected boards. And so what we want to offer to do is, at the time when you begin to talk through some of these issues where your discretion lies, write up some charter language as we did for the town meeting, and get through this section. That's it for my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Mel, before we turn it back to the committee, I just want to provide a quick extra comment, sort of maybe push you on the spot a little bit. So one of the things that we do, I'd sort of like to get your comment on it, Mel, just for the committee. One of the things we do see as you consider this, and again, we're not trying to tell you the committee sort of which direction to go in, but one of the things that we do see sort of around the Commonwealth as you sort of consider how to draft this is town managers, town administrators are there's a trend towards sort of evaluation, sort of are we getting the bang for our buck? And because of that, a lot of town administrators do like to have that authority around particularly managing employees, because that's one of the things that they may feel that they're getting sort of evaluated on. It is something that we do see in the hiring of town managers, is something that people are looking for, and we do notice that some towns, particularly in Central Mass, occasionally do struggle to find candidates when they go out to fill these types of positions. So that's one thing to consider in terms of that it's, increases the desirability as you're sort of posting to fill these types of positions in terms of having that authority. On the flip side, sort of to give you both sides of the coin, is that there are communities that have had an experience with maybe not the greatest of experiences with a town administration, so they can be sort of gun shy in terms of giving it a certain level of authority to that type of position. We usually sort of recommend, and when we sort of draft this language, there's language in the particular select board section about not just the qualifications and how they choose the town manager, but also their ability to remove someone if there are issues. So it's usually those are where the escape valves are. So I want to just put that on the table. No, I don't know if you want to comment on that a little bit, just sort of some of those functional things we see with towns.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of the sections of the charter that we didn't go through that you'll have to make some decisions. But Anthony is correct. There is a trend to include some of these performance evaluation, for example, and other elements within a charter. And we will go through all those with you as we discuss it and give you some examples of what exists in other charters to see if that fits your needs.
So what are the next steps from your standpoint? I don't know if you were copied on or not, but we did send out some of the MOUs that Jim sent us. So we have some of those for the town, so you can see them. Seems to be a lot of it has to do with input on performance evaluations and so on, correct?
So
most people. Go ahead, Charlie. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, we did see those. I think the plan for today was to have you sort of discuss, your current experience with the current, the current situation. What we would do is we would take the existing bylaw and sort of do the same thing we did with the town meeting and port it over. But before looking at the language, we often think it's very good to sort of just, think abstractly, with the background from the memo, just to think abstractly. What's your experience now? What are some ways that you may want to improve it? Maybe you just want to keep with what the existing language says. But at this point, it was, this is the time where we really want to hear what the board thinks.
Can I say it?
Yep. Please.
Reflecting back on my time on boards and things, I honestly think that we should lean to a town manager that has more authority. Now, my big question is, how much authority do you give that person? How is it going to affect the elected boards? Is it possible that you give the authority for a town manager to hire and fire a department head with the input of that committee? I mean, there's a lot of things to think about. I want to get, this is my personal thought, I want to get to that point where we have someone who has a lot more authority than currently happens, because you need somebody at the top. But the problem I have is how to engulf all the boards to agree, or how do we break that down? I mean, I know that some towns actually allow the town manager to appoint the planning board and the board of health and so forth, and not be elected. I'm not really thinking that's the way that we want to go, but I'm open to anything. But these are just ideas. But I just want to make sure that my viewpoint is we do need someone at the top that has some authority. How much do we give them, and how do we do it?
Charlotte?
Um,
Okay, do you want to respond to that, or?
Well, I was just going to say sort of the trend. First of all, let me sort of go backwards. So in terms of managers that have sort of broad appointment authority, those are really strong town managers, and you see that sort of trend increasing as you go to more of like a council form of government, so where the council appoints like a town manager or a city manager. We consider councils more city forms of government. Those types of managers will have extensive authority in terms of appointing boards and commissions. When we're talking about communities with select boards and town meetings, the general trend is to consolidate all the hiring and firing authority of employees into the executive branch in both the select board and the town manager, and to have the other boards, whether they're elected or appointed, really focus on the policy level. And then there is some oversight in the sense that there may be some sort of review or approval of certain terminations from the select board, but still have the town manager make that authority. And again, there's a sort of a tug and pull there. Mel, I don't know if you had anything to add.
What I would say is many communities have navigated this issue by keeping the elected board's policy authority, as Anthony mentioned. So whether it's rate setting or creating policies around whether it's health or the electric department or cemetery, it's giving those elected boards the authority to adopt policies, regulations, but really try to have the administration under the jurisdiction or have some authority of the town manager or town administrator. So, for example, contracting, personnel management issues, property use and maintenance, and things like that. So you're keeping the policy level authority with the elected board, but starting to divest them from some of the administrative day-to-day functions and make it more consistent, uniform throughout the departments.
And Mel, I would just stop me if I'm overreaching here, Mel, but I would sort of just add that we are seeing more and more communities as things are getting more complex adopt personnel policies, and by vesting one body in the executive, the select board and the town manager or administrator with the enforcement of that, it ensures consistent enforcement of like personnel policies and things of that nature across the organization.
Definitely, especially when you're a smaller community and probably doesn't have a robust human resources capacity. It's really important to create some consistency throughout. Employment litigation is a very large risk for many municipalities these days, and so I think it's well worth the effort to try to professionalize that area.
Which we've been doing already, right? HR director and so on. Can I just, and I know you have a question, I just want to follow up to this one more time, because the way you describe that, to me, that sounds consistent now, how the elected boards will be, they're setting policy, but they're not hiring. If you went forward with a stronger town manager, I mean, that's basically where the select board is too, at a different level, but they're basically setting policy and not doing the day-to-day. So it's a consistent approach then, correct? Okay.
I'm confused by how you phrased that.
Okay.
So what are you saying? Are you saying that the elected boards are setting policy as well as hiring?
No.
That's why I'm asking.
Yes,
Please
no.
clarify what you're
So
saying.
what I was saying is that this would be consistent. If you said now the elected boards are setting policy, but they're not doing the hiring, then that's consistent with, as you would probably, we haven't defined it all yet, but how you would probably view the new relationship between the select board and the town manager as well, where the select board is setting policy, but they're not hiring and firing individual people. The town manager or the town administrator, however you want to call it, is doing that. So it's, to me, it's a consistent approach. 'Cause these other boards, the select board as well as the park and rec or library, whoever they are setting policy. But the hiring and firing, and so that those things are consistent and so on, like Anthony was saying, is done through the town manager, administrator.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that's how it should be, I'm just saying, I'm just trying to file things away in my mind to make things consistent.
So I'm trying to combine Joe's comments and your comments,
Okay.
and I'll throw it, but I'd like to go to Charlotte before we dive too far.
Well, sure, I think I was going to answer one of the original questions, like how do we maybe navigate what seems to be maybe one of the biggest topics of the whole charter, but I was wondering if by going through these 4 bullet points, the elements of a charter for executive authority, and saying what is the current situation, like what actually is presently in place in terms of authority within the TA. I also think it's an interesting what is within their authority versus their responsibility, because I see already in some of the write-up there's a mismatch there, responsibility versus authority, but just to go through those systematically. So we're looking at like current and potential future, like what is and is not working within that setup. That might be a nice way to kind of systematically move forward, but also the other points I wanted to raise is just, it mentions a few times the complexity, and as government becomes more complex, and with Littleton looking to grow quite substantially in the next few years with the King Street development, I think a lot of the community's concerns are around, the police department, the fire department, the keeping up with the sort of facilities in Littleton. It just seems like that is going to be increasingly complex, maybe putting us in the direction of having a stronger manager administrator. And then my question was going to be, what kind of synergy should we be thinking about here with the potential CFO financial director conversation? Because it seems like when you're talking about the budget and the responsibility for that, you could almost have like a matrixed JD with the two positions and how they kind of line up as well. So more questions, but yeah, that's all I was going to share.
Thank you.
So I agree with that approach, stepping through it and then coming up with those decision matrices, responsible, accountable. So I think everyone's seen those.
Right.
I did have a question though on the school committee, police and fire. I understand school committee has statewide things or regulations to keep it separate.
Absolutely.
When we call out police and fire as not part of the current, is that just a Littleton thing, or is that also a state requirement or something that police and fire are
Just a little thing, as far as I know, right?
They might both be strong chiefs now
They are strong chiefs.
under the law, which
does that
there's some
mean?
difference. And
So what does
maybe,
that mean?
maybe our friends could, Mel or Anthony could maybe explain that in better detail. But,
Well,
yeah, go ahead,
go
Mel.
ahead.
Yep.
No, you finished, Tim, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think that both of those chiefs had been made strong chiefs by vote of town meeting prior to that bylaw being created. So maybe that is a reason they set aside those departments as being under the control of a strong chief rather than directly under the control of the town administrator.
Yeah, you're probably right. There is this notion of strong and weak chiefs, not like what we've been talking about, weak versus strong administrators. But I guess the point is that regardless of whether they've adopted the strong or weak chief, somebody has to appoint and supervise the department heads. And I think that's where you want to focus your energies. And there is nothing that says, a town administrator or town manager can't do that if that's part of the decision of the charter and the select board. And most charters don't distinguish between, other department heads and police and fire. The only thing I will say is, and I don't know this, are you a civil service department? Do you participate under the state civil service system?
No, we don't.
Then that would be even more, you would have the discretion. There might be some limited discretion if you're participating in the civil service, but if you're not, there's really nothing
Rob?
Okay, so agree with Charlotte, Karen, the approach. The select board took up, I'd spoken offline with Gary Wilson a month ago with regard to boards and committees, that sort of thing. I presented him with a document. He actually shared that document at Tuesday's select board meeting. They held about 15, 20-minute discussion on it. So couple things in terms of what I think I'm hearing. I know Tim was at select board meeting as well. Some of you may have watched or been online with it, et cetera. In our original charge, I don't see, while there's some broad statements with regard to boards and committees, with regard to elected versus appointed, and number of people, et cetera, I don't see anything within the original charge that discusses the police or the fire that are strong chiefs, and we could get into what that is. I've since spoken to fire chief about that, and as I understand it, open to hearing other opinions, as I understand it, the fire chief has the ability to hire and fire. The police chief does not have the ability to hire. The police chief has the ability to recommend to the select board, but then the select board holds the ultimate decision with regard to hiring. So I want to just come back that I'm trying to do as much as I can to understand our charge. And in that, the only place that I remotely see a potential getting into the fire and police chief, which I'll just say, I'm personally of the opinion we weren't asked by the charge to do anything with them. We inherently, I believe, have a responsibility as directed by the select board's charge to come back with incorporating, in essence, the existing practices pertaining to the fire and police chief. Now, we could have any volume of debate on that, but that's how I'm approaching it, trying to give you the context for it. The only place I see is the division of authorities between the town manager or administrator and the select board. Okay, that doesn't suggest to me that we get into the decisions with regard to the police department or the fire department, those respective roles. So with that, I'm just going to put it up just briefly. I prepared a grid. Gary passed out this grid to all the select board members. There was discussion of it. And it goes to the MOUs that Jim distributed to you and that hopefully we've all seen. There's a significant, within this grid, there are certain committees, boards that are required by law to be elected. School committee, for example, the Light Commission, and then Mark Rombacher recently said he thinks it possibly could pertain to library trustees as well. So they actually went through the document and discussed aspects of, they thought that our charge, if Gary were here, it'd be easier to say, Gary, what was your takeaway from the 15, 20-minute discussion about this? But here that this list was the list that they were saying, yes, the charter should be looking at these boards and committees and not the other 20 or so. And in that was not listed the police department or the fire department. So I want to just establish in terms of going through, as Karen and Charlotte suggested, this delineation, I'm of the opinion we stay away from those two unless we hear further clarification. I'll stop. I see Charlotte.
So one question on that. So I see that if we're talking about the actual police department and the fire department, doesn't necessarily seem, we're not necessarily going to dig in and look at, the operations or efficiencies there. But if we're looking at this, what's happening now, what would happen in the future? If you currently have a situation where the TA is given the authority to appoint and supervise all department heads, but not the police and the fire, and those are therefore under the select board fully. Without getting into the details of the police and fire departments, I think that surface decision is something that could sit within our purview to discuss. Do you want to make that a more consistent level of authority? And I would think what the Collins Center said earlier, that a lot of towns don't divvy it up. So you're either in charge of all of them or you're not.
Yeah,
And so, and not getting into the details of each department, but that, to me, that is the essence of the question around the division of authority between the select board.
Yeah.
But we stay at that level, perhaps.
Yes, and then we could build in things like they can delegate authority to the police chief to hire and fire, whatever. But I think it needs to be consistent across the board, and we shouldn't be carving out segments that get treated differently or special.
So I'm open to that discussion. I might suggest that we ask the select board for clarification of their expectation of in the charge that they want that. Or if you folks feel strongly that, no, we've given our charge and we're just going to
Yeah.
take it and run with it, I'm fine with that as well. I just point out that in the conversations I've had, I'm not of the opinion, as I
Okay,
stated.
so I'm
Yeah,
curious
right.
I'm curious about the list that you made and presented to the select board, because we haven't seen it. So did you do that as part of this commission, or just as yourself, or what?
I did as myself a month ago with regard to concern, because at the time, there was this question if we were going to discuss boards and committees.
Right.
So I immediately went to Gary and said,
Okay, but, I mean, we really should be doing that as a committee, though, right? But we haven't even seen the list, and you went to the select board. I feel kind of bad about that.
but I did it as an individual, and the select board did take it up in a public meeting
But
last
okay.
week.
But you did it because you wanted to understand the scope of our charge here, partly. So anyway, it
was
doesn't
more
matter.
than a-
It's
that was
done,
more
so we
than
can
a
go
month
by.
ago.
I'm just trying to understand. And we still, and again, I would have appreciated if you could have at least shared it with us, because we still don't have it. I didn't happen to watch that select board meeting yet
Yeah,
on my
I'm-
list.
I think that does go to a broader issue. I saw how Charlotte with the tracker pursued it. I don't feel like we've had that discussion with regard to what we've had is the training with regard to open meeting law. So how to convey things that we want to put on the table for agendas and how to get things like this. I feel that there has been discussion with regard to whether getting into boards and committees.
Okay, well, do you want to share what you presented with them and what these boards are and what the decisions were? That
Sure.
would be great.
So here's, so happy to do that. So I think connecting it to something that you did receive from Jim Duggan pertains to the 8 MOUs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll briefly, try to be brief.
Try real hard.
Required to be by law, select board, elected. School committee has to be elected.
Yep,
Light commission has to be elected.
yep.
Okay. Library, Mark Rambecker believes has to be elected. My source was the government study review, so he may be right. I didn't do any research. So of the ones that remain that are elected versus appointed were assessors, health, cemetery, housing seemed to be an appointment with regard to the governor's appointment for one of the members. Library trustees, that was Mark. Park and Rec, planning, trust fund. And then water commission, that kind of in between. Those are the ones that I believe, Tim can hold me, accountable. Those were the ones that they seemed to accept that list was the ones that they thought we should focus on as opposed to the other ones. Again, not saying police and fire, but we can take that issue up.
Can I
Sure.
jump in really quick?
Sure.
I'm super sorry, but I thought today was to talk about the town manager and those roles. I think there's a whole other section about what
Boards and
committees are
committees.
elected.
As cited by Jim, cited in the government structure review, over the course of time, and, and their document also on executive authority also discusses the existence of these MOUs. We see that a number of them have already given the authority to supervise the department head, like Park and Rec was just done in 2024 with regard to deferring to the town administrator that responsibility. So we're increasingly seeing this direction, in my opinion, of 8 MOUs with regard to the Council on Aging gave multiple years ago. Town administrator, you were to supervise Liz Trediak as the director of the elderly care and community education. So that's how I'm connecting these things in terms of identifying that the 8 MOUs that were distributed as part of our prep for today with regard to moving to the town administrator. And so I see it in that way as being pertinent to understand what is otherwise being pushed. And I think that coincides with, Joe, with what you were saying of directionally towards a more of a town manager with broader responsibilities than lesser responsibilities.
If I can, I have a list of the same committees. I didn't watch what happened in the select meeting. I know they're interrelated. I believe in what Karen says, we're one subject, but they relate, they touch everything. I think later on, we do have to go through, just like was stated here, on mine, this was for my own reference for the future. But I had put down what's elected and what's appointed, so in the future, we can actually talk about that, because I think we have to go through each one of those and say what the merits are about it, but they are related to the authority that we want to give to the town manager, if we go town manager.
I think the direction is with regard to if the select board over a period of the last 10 years has received 8 different MOUs placing the authority by, well, I'll just deal with Park and Rec, the most recent one, Park and Rec Chair signed the agreement with regard to the PRCE director will be supervised by the town administrator, and that was just done 1 year ago. That's indicative of this direction of the town administrator's office through the select board for that, accumulation of authority with regard to the running of the town.
So a point of just clarification, then just piecing this together for myself. So we have the bylaw. If you just read the bylaw, the town administrator is a weak position with, in terms of managing and supervising, except the police and the fire. Hiring and firing. But then we now have these MOUs, which kind of have bumped it to more authority. But that's really messy. So if I was looking again, this kind of current future, it sounds like the town's already comfortable with and actually operates well with more authority given to the town administrator. It's just not codified, it's still a little messy, it's a little inconsistent, but is that what we're saying, that when you add bylaw plus MOUs, you're already at a place where you might describe the TA's role as being stronger?
Except I think that the hiring, firing is not part of most of the MOUs, right? They supervise,
It's
but
still
they don't
just-
hire and fire.
Right, the board.
And it's
Is that
still
correct?
just those, okay. Because I noticed that each one almost had
Yeah.
very similar
No,
sort of,
it was,
in
exactly.
this one instance,
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
just do this one
Right.
thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, maybe that is one of the things then, to me, it seems like that's one of the big questions. Do you want to say broadly that the town administrator has that, or whoever manager has that authority? What are the pros and cons of that?
Yep.
Too much power and they're just sort of hiring and firing all over the shop, and is that a concern, or is it too little and you have a complete mess? I mean, where does that
But there are ways to deal with that. Some of the charters that Betsy, you threw out 4 or 5 of the other communities that Collins had identified. I looked through several of them briefly. And, one of them I thought was rather interesting in that it identified with regard to the hiring, it required almost 4 out of 5 select board members. It didn't require unanimous, but it required a great number of them to agree with regard to actions proposed by what appeared to be, to me, indicative of a strong town manager responsibility to get to Charlotte's point with regard to out of control sort of situations. Seemed like that was a mechanism intended to not just present one single individual empowered to do anything and everything without oversight, but rather required a check, if you will, and a stamp of approval with regard to the proposed action of that strong town manager.
I almost think if we were sort of running with this for a second, but if this was part of our report and recommendation, I almost see that last part as risk mitigation column, right? That you have, Littleton has personnel policies in place. Those policies will be updated, sort of HR, I think was mentioned before, the kind of consistent HR practices that you say, okay, if you're going to delegate this kind of authority to the administrator, but there would be these kind of checks, and therefore, if we're presenting that as a recommendation, these are the ways to maybe allay some of those potential concerns that one might have if you're like, we're just kingmakers, you know?
I think excuse me, we really need to get somebody in from the select board to talk through this.
Oh, yeah, we will. We will. I think that was a specific decision, was for us to talk and needle it through first, and then have them come in, then we'll have more specific things rather than having
Yeah,
completely
right.
free-flowing, so, I mean, clearly, we need to do that. But I think it is important for us, I mean, it's very, I think this is a very good discussion, very interesting discussion, so.
Can I add one additional question, which
No.
jumps on from Alan's? I'm going to just ask it anyway. I'd also love to hear on some of these, where was it, like, authority to work on the budget but not the responsibility. Like, what is the details of that, you know, and what do we want to adjust? Like, what does it mean to be responsible, but there's no details in the bylaws? Like, you know, getting into some of that granularity, I think, would be really helpful.
I think it's asking us to get into that. At least I looked at, Mel's got his hand up, so let me stop.
Yeah, well, for sure. And so, you know, you have the town administrator section, and you might say, for example, the town administrator has the authority to prepare and submit a budget. We also have, in most charters, there is a finance section where you get into more detail about what this all means and how the town administrator must work toward prepare such a document. We also have a requirement in most charters that there has to be a personnel system that usually the town administrator prepares and the select board approves. You may have also a personnel board in your town, I'm not exactly sure at this point. But there are other sections of the charter that dovetail together with this authority. So in particular, I find that the budget in the finance area and the human resource personnel area are two sections that will get into more detail about how this authority works. Sometimes we'll go back and forth, and or you'll do a section and you'll set aside a few items or get into the details, and then when you'll get back to them as we begin to talk a little bit more in detail about these other sections. That's just the point I want to make.
Thank you. Kevin, you're on the HR board for Kevin, is that correct?
I'm on the Personnel Advisory Committee,
Okay.
which is, I think, something that we might, now that you mention it, Mel, I think that entity was downgraded from a committee some years ago to a Personnel Advisory Committee. And I think that may be something that warrants some consideration going forward. I believe the current charter for that committee is very narrow and focused on doing job evaluations. I think.
Yeah,
Because you were on it for a long time, right? Or
Yeah,
what the
it's-
prior version of that, whatever.
really has downgraded to practically,
Because we have a stronger HR department now,
Right.
correct?
yes,
Right. That was on purpose.
that was the reason why that went from doing personnel policy to doing advisory work, so, because they have a full-time and a couple of people, so. That's gonna be the case with a lot of what we look at. We're looking at the town manager or town administrator supervising a department head who has a committee who are setting policy. But what if the policy they're setting for the department head doesn't square with what
yeah.
the town manager sees as the overall need? That's gonna be, squaring that one's tough.
So I'd like to pull us back up to where Charlotte first suggested the first item of appoint and remove department and other employees. We've gotten into the weeds the last 15, 20 minutes. I wonder about pulling it back up to this first statement and ask, because I think what I'm hearing from those that have spoken is directionally for the consolidation of responsibility towards a strong town manager. Using that term, it could be a strong town administrator, but I also embrace the concept that is recommended here or stated with regard to often the town manager is just perceived to be the more dominant of the two terms, so therefore I find myself advocating a town manager role should we be headed toward this direction. And so I'd just like to hear from others, is that where we seem to collectively be? I think I was stopping and doing the subdivision with police and fire, and yet we're even going into those areas, which I'm fine with proceeding. I just looking to try to get consensus as we spend some detailed time and pull us back up to a summary level.
My thought is absolutely. Bring in professionals with expertise, let them run with it. I mean, the other boards are volunteers and part-time, and the whole consistency thing, I think, is huge. Plus, you get visibility across all the actions, so I'm all for it being managed under the administrator or the manager.
I just want to see clear definition of responsibilities. I don't know about stronger or weaker. I just think clear definition.
Have you worked with, in the past, I'm sure everyone's seen it, if you came from corporate, the decision matrices and the responsibility thing, where you define there's one accountable person, but then who's responsible for doing it or delegating it, who's informed, who's consulted. I think that's
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to what
Yeah,
you're
and I
getting
think,
to.
Charlotte, you made a suggestion earlier. What is current state? There is a current state that consists in the bylaws and certain MOUs and practices. Then there's another column that talks about options for the future, I think. Do we want to expand in the higher, I could see a table, a matrix, higher fire, budget, whatever, current state. And what are either alternatives that we should consider going forward? And I think that document would serve not only us, but would help the select board give us guidance, their thoughts about the topic, and other people as well.
So I like that idea, and I'd put as another category the aspect of goal setting, and whether that's goal setting for the next year, which often relates to a budget, or goal setting with regard to the next 3 to 5 years, because some of these departments have responsibility, like the open space and recreation plan, that requires participation from various departments with regard to that forward-looking, or finance committee with regard to a 5 and 10 year, sort of perspective. So I would just throw out that the aspect of who would be responsible for goals would be another category with regard to consideration in addition to other aspects that you mentioned.
So in that hypothetical matrix, you would have essentially appointment. What is the current situation? What are our options? Qualifications. What does the current qualifications say? What are our options, etc.? And then maybe what you're pointing out, you'd have powers. Like, what are the current powers? And then that's probably where you'd have a lot longer section where it details power to do X, Y, Z, duties X, Y, Z. And then again, like you were saying, Kevin, not necessarily this is what we will decide, but these are this is the menu of options, or how it could look in a different circumstance. And also just going back to the framing of this, I think if you're going to make what sounds like we're discussing quite substantive changes, I think, a branding change makes sense as well, right? The administrator to manager, I think, also helps to communicate that this is a change, and it is going to be a little different. Even though administrator might feel more consistent, I think it's probably more, depending on what decisions the committee takes, probably helps to communicate.
I hadn't thought about the branding piece. That's good. I think it more in terms of hiring. Just when you interview, when you have a job, open job, you're going to get a different set of candidates for manager versus administrator. But anyway, do you want to just, this is all great. I would like to go through these other points and just have this free round discussion again about these other areas as well. Sound good? Okay, so contracts for goods and services. So tell us how that happens today.
There's a section of the bylaws on procurement,
Yeah.
which I think isn't that old, maybe 10 years or so ago. And I think that section actually gave more authority to the town administrator and to the, I guess, the finance director, whatever the position was at the time. It gave them contract authority under a certain dollar amount. It largely was, according to the procurement statutes, but there were exceptions where the authority to enter into certain contracts was given directly to the administrator.
Okay.
And I don't remember the chapter, but it's in the town
I
bylaws
would have
under.
thought that the select board are not signing every contract or something.
Right, I think that was
Right
part of
now.
it. They did,
Right.
they didn't have to sign the little $500
Right, yeah, exactly.
contract for mowing or whatever, yeah.
But yeah, we do see them in repeated select board meetings. I'll just, not saying this is the regulation, but I'm familiar that they've had the $98,000 tie-in bond, that contract that was signed, and Jim went and requested permission, and then there was a simple motion and a vote, and rather quick, expedient
Yep.
sort of thing. I think there was just one the other night that was similar in terms of a more substantial,
Yeah, I think-
approximate 100K, sort of
Yeah.
contract authority.
Contracting for engineering services is somewhat different than for most other goods and services, so I'm not familiar with what that contract was, but,
So maybe we could ask the question
Well,
yeah.
of,
Clearly will, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so no big discussion really there, because that kind of falls into the same thing, needs some,
I think we'd agree that the
based on
the
dollar amount
manager
or
or
different things.
whoever ought to have more authority.
More authority to do some of that, right?
Yeah.
And even that, even within the town, and there's probably some department managers who can contract to a certain level as well.
Exactly,
right.
exactly, right.
And does it also apply to the type of contract? Like if it's property versus
Well,
equipment?
there were different,
versus-
different sections of the Procurement Act, depending on the transaction, whether it's
Yeah.
real property or goods and services or
Yeah, okay.
construction or,
Yep.
yeah.
I'll just note that there are also select boards moving in the last month and a half with regard to streamlining the select board meetings with regard to, I think we've all seen the dirigible coming forward with regard
I saw
to,
that,
for
yeah.
one single day event, that sort of thing. And now select board just gave the authority to Jim as the town administrator to,
Right,
do
yeah.
that,
Yep.
et cetera. So I think there is this direction to moving towards that existing town administrator, let alone a rebranded town manager concept.
Mhm.
Okay, so not a lot of discussion on that one.
No,
All right, prepare and recommend the annual budget.
He's doing that now.
I think that would come as a surprise to the Finance Committee, I think.
did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
But that is what the bylaw says right now.
I don't think too many
But
town
that-
administrators
That was a
ever.
recent change, too.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if you asked the people that have served under that bylaw, if they felt like they were very much in control of the budget process, they would have said no.
Article 4 was always the finance committees, putting together the budget was the finance committee, recommending to the select board. And
Before, yeah,
Yeah, but
unless there's a
somewhere
bylaw.
along the way, it
As a
changed.
person who was on, and you were, maybe longer than I was, but I was on FinCom too, and I was a chair for a while. But we didn't really create that budget. Bonnie did, right? Or whoever the finance director was. I mean, it was with, but she's talking to the select board and to the assessors or the, the revenue people and all that stuff to figure it out. She comes up with something, then she comes to us and says, well, this is kind of where I am, and I'm still adjusting these numbers and so on. But the reality is, it's not, back in the old days, Steve Venuti used to do the budget, right? When he was on the FinCom.
Yep.
But in reality, we really haven't done it for a while. We do recommend it. It is still ours to say, no, we don't approve that, we're not going forward with that. But we haven't, from my opinion, I don't know how you feel. I'm not saying right or wrong how it should be or shouldn't be. I'm just saying the reality is,
Well, the
Yeah.
reality is what it is now. We
Which
had
is-
much more control before.
Well, yeah.
the FinCom had more control
Yeah.
before, yeah, right.
But let me, if I could, the government study review, page 9, the current bylaws call for a Department of Finance and Budget led by a director who reports to the town administrator.
Yep.
As presently codified, directors shall serve as either the town accountant or treasurer collector. And so they're really calling out, so I think that's what you said, is it may have shifted and got squishy with regard to FinCom's role. Personally, my 3-4 years here now, sure seems like Steve Venuti's the de facto, with the Finance Committee, the de facto almost CFO, the way I think he's given great latitude in joint meetings of the Select Board and the Finance Committee. But having said that, Gary, in the most recent select board meeting, even cited a situation, I guess going back many, many years, where there was a difference of opinion between FinCom and the select board. In fact, town meeting was approached with two different, budgets.
A long time ago, I think.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask Alan, what control do you think has shifted or gone away from the committee
Yeah,
recently?
some years back, maybe 12 years or so, the FinCom felt like we needed someone within the administration, a finance director, to be looking at stuff full-time because we were looking at it piecemeal. So we got a finance director who happened to also be the accountant. Later on, we went from just a finance director to starting to put together a finance section for the town, for the administration. And as that came on, what the finance committee did for detail work shifted over to the administration side. And so that's where we are now. There was a point in time when I first joined the finance committee when we actually sat down with pencils and calculators and put the budget together.
Yeah.
It worked, but it was much smaller and a different time frame. So now we have professional folks,
Right.
and it works better that they do, in fact, respond to the town administrator. And the finance committee still has the role to say, we don't recommend that. Here's what we think you should do. And they can say that to the selectmen, who can take their advice or not, because they can always say it at town meeting. So that's where those roles are now.
Thank you.
Alan, just wondering then, because it seems like as the town has grown, as there has been more complexity, presumably the actual numbers have grown, that the move has already been to physically grow the number of people that are working on fiscal responsibility. If you were to envisage then what that looks like going forward, does it make sense to have, this current situation? You have the TA's office, which is essentially the mechanics of the budget, like putting it together. FinCom is advisory, it sounds like, and then as per the study, you have potentially a financial director, which I guess we'll discuss later, that would be, the things that stood out for me in that recommendation were like evaluating the financial impact of policy decisions, in-depth fiscal analysis, cost implications, written procedures. It seemed much more to do with kind of broader strategic role, but do the budget within the TA's office. Does that, would you change that? Yeah.
If I may, not to sort of interrupt, but just to sort of provide a little bit of context. And this, I think, often can be confusing or often gets convoluted in a lot of communities, but I just want to sort of provide this context, is that the select board and the town manager are separate. There's a division of authority, a division of power between them and the town meeting. And in many ways, the finance committee is an extension of the town meeting. So it's one of the reasons why you can get different opinions on the budget or recommendations on the budget when you go to the town meeting. The finance committee is sort of looking at it and sort of summarizing the budget for the town meeting for them to have a role. But they're acting as an extension. Traditionally, they're acting as an extension of the town meeting and not really part of that executive branch. So I just want to add that context, just so you understand the roles that these different bodies play in that context. Mel, I didn't know, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I'd also like to follow up on what Charlotte mentioned. The policy, the budget is obviously complicated. You have to have a balanced budget. You have Proposition 2.5. You have a lot of components of the budget that are just mechanically difficult to put together. That's part of the budget, but I think what we're really talking about is something larger. It's a little bit more of an executive function to use the budget as a policy document, a policy tool to, really put forward what the town's vision of municipal services are for the next year and perhaps even multiple years. Often, part of the budget processes these days are both long-term financial forecasts as well as longer-term capital improvement plans. So I think what we're talking about is a little bigger than just putting the budget together and making sure it balances at the end of the day. That's really what an executive level function is for the budget.
And I'll just say, I see that as being that associated with a strong town manager conceptually, and having finance committee be more of that advisory and council perspective as opposed to the creator. I think that's a transition, and then just I'm sure everybody's aware. You know, Ryan Ferrara leaving May 9th, so select board, Jim, are going to have a decision right in front of them with regard to replacing that position, and so who are they going to bring in, and what is the capability of that person? That's very much an important hiring decision that's going to be made rather soon, I would think.
So I wish I don't have it, it's in my email someplace, because I know the, Fred and Steve sent me something from, I thought it was a state document saying this is the role of the finance committee. And it very much says they do the budget, they own the budget.
Yeah,
So we should get that wording though and understand where
It's a
that's coming
document
from.
put out by the Finance Committee Association.
Okay,
So they would like
I know,
that to be the case,
I know.
but not
We still need
necessarily.
to have all the facts so we
Yeah.
know what's coming from where. Right.
Yeah, it came from Fred.
Oh, yes. Are you all familiar with that, Anthony and Mel? With what we're talking about? No? Okay, I'll get it for you. I'll find it.
It's from the Finance Committee Association. Mel, are you?
Well, yeah, yes, I'm aware of that document. I mean, I would say that the trend has been that the budget is an executive function. As Anthony mentioned, the Finance Committee is an extension of the legislative branch as opposed to the executive. So I really think it's different. And I don't think, I'll look at that document that the Finance Committee puts together, but you're not limited in your charter as to how you put it together. The Finance Committee must make recommendations to town meeting, that's for sure. But whether they have to put the budget together or not, I think is really a decision of your locality.
Tim?
Yeah, I think that the Finance Committee is responsible for producing the budget that goes before town meeting, and unless there's a bylaw or a charter that states, to the contrary. In other words, if the town has a budget bylaw, and we really have one line in, the town administrator's section that says he's in charge of the budget process. So, for years, we kind of had this back and forth with the selectmen at the time and the Finance Committee, whose budget is it? And I think the answer was, it's the Finance Committee's unless there's a bylaw or some other standard that we uphold. So I guess you could argue we don't really have that memorialized anywhere else. So that's a good opportunity, I think, for us to do it now, or to put the responsibility where it belongs, because it's kind of been all over the place over the years.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Clarity.
Yes,
Right?
right.
I don't know if it's more or less or who or where. It's clarity about who has what responsibility. And without getting into more or less, I endorse, in a publicly traded company, the CEO is responsible for proposing for development of a budget and recommending it to the board of directors. And there's a finance committee that works with the CEO and the CFO along the way to develop a budget that makes sense. And by the time it gets to the board of directors, it'll be approved because the finance committee was involved. But if the town administrator is responsible for executing the budget, my recommendation would be the town administrator is responsible for preparing the budget. That would be my thought.
So I'll just take a moment to read, what we all got in the mail the last week or two, and opening line: to the residents of Littleton, the Finance Committee is pleased to present the annual budget. And then in a later paragraph, in working together with the select board and the team. So the words are certainly saying us, Finance Committee, whereas the deliberations on Super Saturday and the like certainly suggest that it was the town administrator and Ryan that were presenting the data, and then hearing the department heads come before the joint committee of the select board, the joint meeting of the.
I think the article is sponsored by both the select board and the finance
Yeah,
committee jointly.
I'm just
So-
saying, but as a resident, you'd read this, and I think you'd be left with the impression, the way the words are. So I agree, we need to clarify
Right.
and make it clear.
Right.
And then coming back to the qualifications piece as well, I mean, appointment, qualifications, and term, depending on what the responsibilities are of a town administrator manager, you presumably would want to then add some clarity about what level of qualifications, exposure, like what level of fiscal responsibility do you want, experience, et cetera.
I'd agree. Some of the other charters that I've read really go with regard to the qualifications of, say, a town manager, et cetera, and kind of go to that level. And, you know, kind of using Karen with regard to your comment with regard to bringing professionals, et cetera. We're very, very fortunate, and some of you served in finance committee before I, came into town, but I think we're exceedingly grateful for the finance committee, who's on it, the council, what they've done for the town, in the last decade, et cetera, and gotten us, strong rating and put the house in order, so to speak. Having said that, those are volunteers. And so as I look from a forward standpoint, am I comfortable thinking that all those people that exist right now, that their like kind is going to be there next decade and decade after that? That's where I find myself going exactly the opposite way of bringing the professionals and put into place the responsibility with regard to the town office, the executive function is having the responsibility for it, and not just for the immediate budget, but as Mel referred to, with regard to the forward-looking, the capital aspect. There's so many challenges, I think, with regard to, as we look at 550 King Street, you've got to have a vision with regard to what our town's going to look like financially several years from now, as opposed to where we currently are. And all those challenges, that requires more of a CFO strategic sort of look and leadership with regard to development of where we're at today, what we're proposing for the next immediate year, and how it lines up with regard to the future expansion of the town that clearly is before us.
Yep. But, having said all that, go ahead.
No, I agree with what you said, but don't we, in a way, currently have what you just said, where we have a finance department, which way back when I was in the town government study committee, we recommended because we didn't have that. But you have people being paid, the professionals that work on that, and we have the recommendation from the finance committee. Aside from what's written in the book, which I was fascinated that they brought that up. But I think we're heading in that direction. That we have professionals, we're hiring professionals.
So I'm in agreement with you, Joe. I think we've got the opportunity to make a recommendation to get out of the marketing or the branding of it and really declare and codify this is where the responsibility lies, much like we were talking about the matrix with regard to different aspects of it. Let's just really solidify what our recommendation is as to moving forward. I think it's an opportunity for us.
FinCom's role is still very, very strong.
Oh,
If
extremely.
they say, no, we don't approve.
Most town voters
It's
are going to
huge,
say,
right?
wait a minute.
Right.
No, you want to have that oversight and debate and
Somebody else looking at it, right?
Absolutely.
Couldn't agree more.
And for that clarity piece, I think even just hearing the Cotton Center reiterate that some of these fall within the legislative bucket, some of them are at the executive, so even for a resident trying to understand why, who's touching the budget and why and how, I think even just saying that there are executive functions, there are legislative functions, this is what happens over here, this is what happens over there, and maybe some of that is then codified in the charter language, and then maybe some of it is actually just a recommendation that we clarify that.
That's a good point. I love that, because I hadn't thought about that or heard that before, about FinCom actually being part of town meeting.
Right.
Being part of that. So
it
that
sort of
that
reminds
was
me
a-
like Congress approves the budget,
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah.
that
It is
sort of, I was like,
some of those things.
okay.
You put things into good, yeah.
But I do think having some, even if it's like a statement or a sort of description that just delineates those different responsibilities, even if we're not
Yep.
putting them into a charter, yeah.
Okay, you want to talk a little bit about control, are we good with that? Talk it through a little bit, okay? Control and use of municipal property and facilities? How much of that is spread around now? Go ahead.
Yeah, you got, the select board has that responsibility now, but we're hiring a full-time facilities manager. So we have a professional department coming on board to do exactly that.
But are there still issues, there used to be even like between Park and Rec and the town in terms of who's maintaining what fields and all that kind of stuff, and who gets to use them when, and then the school department gets involved sometimes?
That's a good point, because I'm almost positive when you talk about Fay Park, Fay Park is now the responsibility of the Park and Rec. But when I was looking for something in our codes, right in our code, it says the Fay Park is a responsibility of the select board.
Yes.
So he has some of those contradictions that have to be taken care of.
Well, and I'll go to one of the MOUs is the cemetery, and I believe that MOU identifies the I apologize, don't remember the exact title of the cemetery top person, but that person will report basically to the public works, sort of thing. So we're seeing that alignment, and again, much like some of the other things that we've said, there's an opportunity to codify and align things should we come to a consensus and recommend clarification.
That's one of those things that I've been thinking about. Certainly should go to Public Works, be part of the Public Works Department. That being the case, we have elected cemetery commissioners.
Yeah.
Is that going to be one of the things we look at to abolish?
We'll see when we get there.
Well, it makes
Right.
perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Appointed.
There's several areas that's going to come up. So.
Yeah.
So,
But beyond that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Charlotte.
no, just clarifying for
Yeah.
Mike. So, yeah, if you were to consolidate public works, you would then, that would sort of feed back into what the TA is or isn't responsible for, because it would be, you don't have to have all these piecemeal reporting, is what you're saying. Like, if you just consolidate those, there's fewer things to designate to the manager.
The MOUs, you mean?
Well, right now, well, if you have, you have the cemetery operations, just for an example.
Right.
But if you were to consolidate all of the public works functions under one authority, you would have less decisions to make about individual management of individual departments, because that would all be consolidated theoretically. Right? Okay.
And I think that from a resident standpoint, you'd not be confused, as Joe pointed out, with regard to Park and Rec and Fay Park. So if you have an issue, who do you go to? Do you go to Park and Rec, or do you go to the TA, that sort of thing? And similar with the cemetery, I think we'd all be surprised that you wouldn't go to the TA or to, Steve Yonley.
Well, that's another one of those that Park and Rec, divide that stuff out. It gets, put parks where they belong in the DPW, and the current Park and Rec is responsible for all the recreation stuff they do. But somebody else has control of the parks
Facilities.
and the facility and taking care of them.
Yeah,
What
it's
about-
the use versus the care.
Yeah. So what about things like buildings? Like, are the schools, I mean, it kind of works now in terms of who maintains what, right, and the budget and so on, but even though the school operation is mandated by the state, I don't know how much that gets into this stuff though, right?
In one of the charters, I saw that there was somewhat of a dual reporting, if you will, with regard to the public works, with regard to reporting to both the school committee, because there are schools and, such a dollar value
Fields and
associated with
things
those.
like that too, I mean, that's where some of this stuff gets.
Well, there are towns that share facilities manager between schools and between the
Okay.
general government side, so they kind of report the two masters, if you will, and some don't. I take it we don't, right? Ours?
We don't.
Yeah. The schools do their own thing.
At the current.
Currently,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's probably those things that we mentioned, I think that the fields and that, because other than that, most of our facilities they're pretty much done centrally, right? All our other buildings, it's like the library is still part of the town, that's not managed by the library trustees or anything like that, the
I
building.
don't think so.
No.
So I think we're kind of seeing it all being solidified in one place. Is that what we're saying?
It's hard to argue against some of that, given the size of things now and the complexity of things now, of having more of these things centralized and having it done consistently and all that. I mean,
Well, there's still a reason to look hard at some of the elected boards,
oh, yeah.
looking at keeping them rather than not, because there's value in having community people in certain positions, like the FinCom. I would not like to see the FinCom go away and become appointed professionals, because there's a real value of them being the citizens of the town, especially when they have the ability to say, we don't recommend.
Right.
I'd like to keep that.
Well, I think just, Ellen, just building off of that, even with the cemetery, I could see as advisory and having a group that is reviewing the activity led by potentially a strong town manager position, but you still want to have a group of citizens, much like the FinCom role, giving a perspective of we agree with it, or we want to be recognized for the people who we are, responsible, for reviewing what's taking place and whether we're in sync with it or whether we're,
They could still be
have
appointed.
concerns.
They wouldn't have to be elected necessarily, right? I mean, as long as they're local.
Yeah, that's to a point where you don't want to have everything be elected. Because,
Right, no, yeah.
You know, you gotta-
As a former DPW commissioner, I would not like that.
I get it.
If the guy works for me, I don't want you to, I'll make the decision.
And it says control the use and care of. I see that also as implying some level of sort of authority and regulation, like setting what can and cannot be done, like having a little bit of that final decision-making authority or what have you, which might, in the trend that we seem to be going, like having that authority consolidated within the town office, but like you said, having guidance and advice and kind of input
Transparency.
and the transparency, and holding the office accountable, right? You have a guiding committee that says, what are you doing? And actually, but it does seem, coming back to your point, Kevin, if you're also, if you're going to execute, you should also be responsible for it. Like having that, what they call it, a sort of total ownership of the supply chain, right? When you talk about sort of being able to be responsible for each step along the way.
I think the control aspect's an interesting perspective, because like the use of Fay Park at Park and Rec Commission meetings, you periodically, Neshoba Praying Indians would like to do a summer moon festival, and they have to appear before the Park and Recreation Commission in order to say, can we have this date for these period of hours and set up the night before, that sort of thing, and it requires there to appear. And I more or less view that as a within reason, much like Select Board just gave to the town administrator the capacity for the single day event use. These things should be, simple, and they shouldn't require that level of bureaucracy that tie up and require presentations and appearances.
Yeah, two different boards.
Correct.
'Cause
And so why
half the
not?
time, they did have to come to the select board to get the approval to have alcoholic license for the
Right.
day, blah, blah, blah.
But even the use, and the most recent meeting, there was even the whole aspect of the school committee coming before, and can they place the graduating high school seniors, pictures, and what are the dates that can be, that all seems to me to not require select board sort of presence in meetings, but rather should be streamlined with regard to a town manager position or even a town administrator position for that matter. And again, we have the opportunity, but I think that you're identifying the word control. It didn't jump out at me the way you just said it, and I think that's like.
Yeah, but I think the important point is that even though, again, we seem to be kind of in agreement that more of this stuff needs to be centralized and so on, it doesn't mean you're getting rid of these boards. You may or may not in some cases, but
Yeah, that's-
but they're not
that's different.
together. They're separate things.
Right.
It's different.
Because I do think that not only the
And
boards,
maybe-
and the boards have an interest in some cases, professional expertise in different areas that other people in town don't have. And so you want that there. So-
And maybe actually frees up time
Exactly.
on those boards to do
Exactly.
less of the administrative
Right.
stuff and more of that
That stuff.
strategic vision setting and
Right.
guiding and like reading about other things that are happening and providing inputs, like versus having to be like check, 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 you know. Yeah.
Okay. And also just gets down to, again, a lot of those boards, again, you've got volunteers who are part-time, and so if you really need a decision, you got to get these people together and do it and so on. All right. Okay, so I think that was good. So, all right, so for Anthony and Mel, so we've kind of went through our discussion, I think, for this. Now, what are the next steps from your standpoint?
Sorry, Betty. Can
Oh,
I
that's- no, okay,
sorry,
go ahead.
Just before you do that,
Yeah.
do we, when it says on the back page, elements of a charter for executive authority, go through appointment qualifications, term removal procedures, do we also want to sort of spitball a little bit about those, or just wait till next time to talk about those things?
Next.
Next time. So, oh, yes, okay, next time.
I read through one of the charters and where it talked about the vacancies, and it was like 3 pages long.
It was a lot in this stuff, yeah, right. And the removal stuff gets really, as it should, you know.
A lot more detail about removal people.
Yeah, exactly. Then hiring's a lot easier.
I retract the comment.
Thank you for bringing it up and make sure we get it on the agenda for next time.
But in terms of the next agenda, might
Yep.
we benefit from having like 1 or 2 of the towns that you identified as maybe at some point we look at some of the other charters? Do we do some of those executive authority subsections, or the town manager, town administrator subsection, or the select board, and just look at 1 or 2 of them as to how they're drafted in order to then find out, much like we've done this, but rather now we have a document in front of us to say, yeah, I kind of agree with this, or I don't agree with this, et
All right,
cetera.
let's see what they're going to say, what Mel's going to say for us and what these guys are going to give to us for next time. Yep.
Well, I want to talk to Anthony, and we always have our recap with you, Madam Chair, but I think this idea of creating a little matrix is a good one, where we identify these various elements of a charter or the fundamental aspects of an executive authority, and create one column that explains how Littleton is set up, including the memorandum of agreements or understandings, and then have another a column or 2 that talk about some options, and we would probably identify some community charter language, or the discretion that each of these communities, and we can identify which community is, and that might help get us through that section.
So are you going to put that together for us, or should we do that?
We'll put that together for you, so we can do exactly what Mel suggested, which is we'll pull your existing language, and for this section, it's a little bit funky because the town administrator is in many ways an extension of the select board, so we kind of would do both those sections, and we'll sort of do the comparison to and we can sort of help pick out some of the what I hear is a leaning towards making this position stronger, so we can pick some of the stronger language and just so you can compare it, and just in terms of long-term planning. I think, you're going to have a lot of language in front of you, so we can spend the next meeting sort of looking at the language in the chart, and then you can maybe notify the town administrator or the select board that you may want to hear from them a couple meetings from now, because once you sort of kind of got some language you're thinking you might use, you might want to be able to send that to them and say, we'd like you to come to another meeting and comment. So that would be maybe 2 meetings into the future.
Okay, that works for me. You good with that, everybody?
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, can you bring up, moving along, the tracker document? I gave it to them so that they could show it to us so we could talk through this. Charlotte, you want to talk to it?
Yeah, maybe while they're pulling it up, to just kind of give a little bit of context. So I sort of see this as just an extension of the minutes, really. It occurred to me that if we're going to do this for 18 months or so, that I would not wish anybody to have to trawl through I don't know how many hours that is of LCTV or how many documents saying, where did you discuss this? When did that happen? What even happened? And even for us to maybe remind ourselves of any outstanding issues. So essentially I thought, okay, how would I mine the minutes and just kind of reorg the minutes in a way that can be more of a reference document for us. So that's kind of what this is. It's essentially a reformatting, if you like, of some of the key points that were brought up over the course of our deliberations. So there's a proposed ideas or action column. There's a status, whether we've rejected that notion, whether we've agreed on it, whether we're still deliberating, i.e. under consideration. A proposed location of where that decision would ultimately be documented. So it could be in the charter, bylaw, multiple things not applicable, or even in our committee report. The categories should align with the ones in our work plan. Just again, that's kind of more for ready reference. The meeting dates, it gets a bit fuzzy because we talk about certain things in lots of different meetings. So the column that says rationale, that's just, again, it's an internal thing where we have said we're probably going to need to rationalize this decision and document it. So it's more, again, a note for us internally. And then the last column is just comments for us. So if anybody was like, oh, what were we supposed to do about that again? In order to not have to trawl through all the minutes, this is kind of a ready reference. As I said to Betsy and Joe, I tried my best to render our minutes faithfully into this, but I'm sure that there are some things where people might be like, did we agree on that? I don't know. But that wasn't kind of my intention. It was more just to provide us with a format to kind of access our follow-ups and our decisions. Yeah.
I actually would like to go down the things real quickly, not spend a lot of time on them, but if there are some, because there were some that I wasn't sure of. There were a couple, I don't remember what they are now, honestly. But I just thought we'd go, make sure that we're all kind of in agreement on this. If it gets long, then we won't go through it. Hopefully most of them will be yeah. So everybody good with that?
I just want to say that I think it's brilliant. I think we're going to be here for months, and we will have talked about things months ago at some point in time, and there's going to come a time when we have to make recommendations to somebody here, the select board, and to have an organized and references to minutes and when did we, I think it's brilliant. I just, the terms agreed and rejected, I'm wondering about, we're going to be making recommendations or not.
Okay, so maybe recommended, not recommended, perhaps.
I don't know that we have any authority to agree or reject. I think we're going to either recommend or not, but...
It's an internal document, so it doesn't matter.
What's that?
It's an internal document to us. So we could say we reject it or we approve it for the purposes of this, for the purposes of providing recommendations.
That was my initial intention, we rejected it. But yes, I take your point very much, Kevin.
But I think this might be worthy of a minute. Like just using the second item, open versus representative town meeting, I think we deliberated on that and we've moved on. And therefore, in anticipation of a public hearing in several months from now, I think that's something that's worthy of disclosure of we're not heading that direction. We can always revise it, should consensus be to revise it. But I think that's the sort of stake in the ground that I'd encourage us for when we seem to arrive at consensus on such an important point that would really lead to, like quorum. That would be another one. We're not heading there. Those things really stand out to me as being significant moments in time that we should be prepared to communicate to the public as well as the select board. This is where we're currently at. If you think we're veering differently, we need to hear from you loud and clear.
The importance of those is just that, whether you use the word rejected or not, but if we exclude them, when we come up with our charter document, they're not going to be there. So that there won't be any discussion, it won't come up with, well, what about this? Because you wouldn't even see it. So it's good to have it here. So we've talked about it.
I agree 100%.
You agree with that? And also, I think, to your point, because you said some of these things, we really need to have some of our deliberation even, maybe? So that could easily go in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Please feel free to deliberate and pass it along. Okay, so anyway, so can we go through these? Because this is great. So the first, is that the first one? Line 4 is really the first one, right? So we're, okay, so we haven't decided, although it looks like we're pretty much going to town manager. Should we just say we've decided town manager, we're going to, for the purposes here, we go forward with town manager, and we not want to say that yet? with the, it's really just the title, right, we've said?
I think we've agreed on the title.
It's just the title.
I'm for
Is there
it.
anybody that's in a disagreement on that?
The title for me is irrelevant.
Right.
It's the
Okay.
clarity of responsibilities.
I agree. Okay, so we can update
So
that
one of those would be, for instance, I would, again, just formatting of the tracker, I would say that we've agreed to change the title, but I would add one from today's meeting to say we are under discussion on town manager responsibilities and
Yes.
authority. So that's where I would kind of reflect it differently.
I even think we were, several of us, I think almost a majority, have expressed directional for a strong town manager.
I would put that in the notes 100%.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so the chain, we talked about 5. 6, clarify division of authority between that, okay, so it's under consideration, that's what we're doing now, right? Add provisions for okay, so those are all, that'll be, again, these are all the things that we found, we've discussed at some point, so we put them on here so we didn't lose them. But then some get categorized, that we'll talk about that later. Public communications, obviously. Reference town meeting time in government documents, we've agreed on that. Allow some reference town meeting time, we don't put the time in, we put the date but not the time.
Sorry, that was in reference to that town meeting time,
The book,
the book,
the manual, yeah.
the rules.
Yeah.
I'll put that in.
Handbook
I'll put that in
on
inverted
parliamentary procedures, what it's
inverted
called, yeah.
commas.
The name of it is town meeting
Okay,
time.
I got it. Oh, I got it. Sorry, I misread that. I understand now. Okay, gotcha. Okay, great. Allow some flexibility in setting the town meeting date and time. All right, so we pretty much agreed on that one, right? Rationale. Clarify the moderator role. We agreed on that. Include more formal language around the moderator role. So what do we decide on that one?
I think I put in the notes here that we would address that when we get to the part of our work plan which talks about the town moderator role. I think
would make sense.
I think that Anthony mentioned that there's a section like other elected officials where you go through, and that's in the notes.
Okay, all right, we got other elected officials there, so that's good. All right, so legislative, back to that group on that. Include secret ballot in charter. What we decided was that's really, well, it's there, but we don't talk about electronic is what we decided, right?
Right.
So it is, we will talk about secret ballot, but we won't talk about electronic secret ballot. Formalize 2 town meetings a year, we've done that now. Extend warrant posting requirements, we've done that. Maintain town meeting report mailing requirement, everybody good. Remove outdated bylaw, we agreed on that. And then consider adding the quorum, no, we said no, we're not gonna do that. All right, so we're back to the town moderator, gets a lot of attention here. As well he should.
I can probably, one of those does seem duplicative. I'll get rid of that one.
All right, define special town meeting procedures. I guess that's in there, right? Require no officials, that's just a typo, to attend town meeting, that's, we agreed on that. Maintain meeting, mandate meeting held within town borders. We agreed that's true, but with there are exceptions, with exceptions.
So when it says things like that, Betsy, in the notes, just off screen, it'll say things like refer to special language in
Gotcha.
charter outlining the
Okay,
requirements,
great,
or
great.
like, where we need to
Yeah.
have a little
But
clarity.
the issue was the
Yeah,
town board, so that makes sense.
exactly.
I think Colony says it the way it is, yeah. All right, so these other ones, review size term boards, elected. So I'm not sure, it says agreed, it says we're gonna
So that's more of a committee, that's why it's listed under committee operations, because we have agreed to
Okay,
review them.
I see.
So some of these are a little
not our work.
meta,
No, I agree.
like what we've agreed to do
Gotcha.
later.
No,
Should there
things we
be-
discussed, yeah.
Should there be a label called pending? Because I don't think have we talked about line 23 at all?
So that was more of, when it says committee operations, it's something that we need to do. So like, we need to review the size term board committees, but we haven't done it yet. But you mean, as opposed to having under consideration, have
Agreed
it,
seems to be on par with things we've sort of
a
agreed to
decision
move on
points,
versus
kind of.
something that's a pending, I would think
So
this
maybe
is,
just
Pending.
take out the agree, or yeah, you could do that, or just take it out, just leave
Or
it
just
blank.
put it under
Just have committee
consideration.
operations, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
that's fair. Okay, review the MOUs, we're in the processes, that's in process. Well, you said that under committee operations, you could probably change that to in process now and put it
Right.
under, well, no, because we're not, it's not, because that's later, we're not doing it. Well,
It
it
dovetails.
kind of, it is part of the TATM role, so yeah, so it's in process, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe, do you prefer that term, then I can just say in process as opposed to under consideration?
For that
because
one,
it's
and then you
more
change
in
it from committee
process.
operations, now it needs to go into the, section we're on now.
Mm-hmm.
All right, create phased approach for committee reviews. Administrative organization. I'm not sure which, I don't remember what that one is, Charlotte.
So that was, sorry, that was to say that we were going to decide how frequently one would review boards and committees. That language is not super clear, but we said somewhere we want to document, or we could document, how frequently boards and committees should be reviewed in the
Okay.
town. I'll update that language to make
Okay.
that more clear.
All right, improve financial presentations, that'll be, well, again, I'm not sure that we, I mean, it's vague, and I'm not sure what we've agreed to there, right?
On the improve
Financial presentations.
So my note on that was the committee recommendation would give a recommendation to select board on policy practice.
Okay.
That they would.
See, personally, I think we're going to deal with that when the finance committee is discussed as part of the work plan. So I'm almost,
More in progress.
Or put it under finance,
And
put it under the finance
okay.
work plan area is.
but I'm not even certain, we'll get to it when we get to it. I don't think we've really delved into it that
No,
much.
we
Right.
haven't.
Okay, so still in progress, okay.
Codify warrant preparation timeline, okay, I think we've done that, right? We've put some, updated some things there. Establish deputy town moderator, we said, no, it's not necessary.
if I could,
Yeah,
I didn't recall definitive discussion on that.
the deputy town moderator?
Right. I don't recall discussing the pluses and having a good, healthy discussion about the benefits of having a deputy town moderator.
I think that was in the.
Was that one of the early
first
meetings where
meeting,
we
I
said
think.
someone from the select board?
I don't know, what I remember is that we did talk about it, and then it just, it works here without having that there's there's other people who've been assigned in the past, it works.
Steps up.
And so it really
Elect
was, it
someone at the town
wasn't
meeting.
necessary.
That's
We
what I
did talk
heard.
about that.
That's why I heard we
I'm sorry, there's
discussed.
three conversations.
Whether the discussion was adequate from Kevin, I think that what's just been stated, that we said it kind of works and there are people that could jump in. I think town council was mentioned as somebody that could be an alternative on the, short notice,
In the
to
past,
step
we
in.
we have nominated and elected people at the meeting to cover the cafeteria or to be an assistant or deputy moderator. And it comes up infrequently enough that we didn't think it was necessary to call it out, because we handle it kind of on the fly and as needed.
I just happen to think that not handling it on the fly would be better. I think that, so I would love to have a more fulsome discussion about that. I think there's bench strength, there's the premise of developing, it's a bit of a succession plan, if you will. I just think not doing it on the fly at a town meeting when you're trying to get a lot of business done, to have a deputy who could step in at the last, but I feel like I'm now getting into the merits, but I didn't know that we had put a stake in the ground on that.
Let's just leave it open until we do.
Yeah. Talk about it again, yeah.
Okay, but then, all right, so we'll get to the town moderator section again, and then we can do it there, I guess, right? So we'll put that in the.
Other elected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Okay, track proposed charter bylaw policy changes, that's committee operations again, so this is just, we're tracking these charters, tracking these things as we go through. So some of them will be charter, some of them will be here, and we'll say, well, that should be in the bylaws or whatever, so we don't lose things. ensure transparency of committee documents. And again, we'll have public hearings and create committee email for public questions. We already have, that's done. That exists.
Done.
And provide newsletter updates. We're doing that. Probably need to do that again now, right? You're already on it. So good, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so we're, thank you for the clarifications there, and, okay, we got that. All right, thank you for the time going through there. Minutes? Do you want to make a motion? Are there any questions? No, make a motion first.
Motion to approve the minutes of
Yeah, second.
April 14th.
Okay, second. Any questions, any discussion on the minutes? And if you have any, by the way, if you, obviously you go back directly, when you get a copy of the minutes, you can go back directly to Charlie. You don't have to wait for the meeting to bring things up. But, okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, and then the only other thing I have is email. We keep trying to get it to be perfect. I'm not sure it's ever going to be perfect. I think the real answer is for people who are getting their email, we have the group email. For people whose email gets forwarded to their personal email, that should work, but you can't reply from your personal email. You have to go to the town email to reply. That won't work. If you go to your personal email and then, I know, it's a bother, but I think that's where we are. And there's probably security reasons and so
And
on.
the same thing, I haven't resolved my problems yet with the town.
Yeah, well-
Things that get rejected are coming back and forth, so anyone who wants to send me something, send it
to
to my,
both. Send
my
to both.
Verizon account, because I'm not getting certain things, and I haven't resolved that problem yet.
I experienced that today. I didn't, so somebody sent an email and said test. And Anthony said, I think, or Anthony, you sent it, and somebody said got it, and I said ditto.
Yeah.
And I got like 6 messages back saying, can't go through, can't go through, can't go through. And it was to something about all of your, it
Right.
wouldn't go to you.
Right, because we forwarded our emails, so you can't reply and have all that stuff. So just so you know, that's where it is right now. We'll still try to get it perfect, but if we don't, if you're having your emails forwarded to your personal email, you can look at them there so you know you got it. But if you want to reply to the group especially, go back to your town email. Sorry, you can do it that way. All right, anything else? Anthony, Melvin, anything for us?
Just that, I think we talked about this, or I sent an email, so we do like an after action like survey, just about, how the committee worked together. So you'll be getting that. It'll be from, I think it comes from ofcouncils.com. So you should be getting that if you're surprised by sort of an unknown email. It's just part of the post-meeting survey.
Okay,
Very good.
right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
You?
Next meeting date?
Motion to
What's that?
adjourn.
Oh, sorry, very important.
Good
I'll
for
make
you,
a
Sharon.
motion.
Oh, the next meeting's in 2 weeks, whatever that date is. Who's got a calendar?
May
May. How is that possible?
12th.
May.
12th, is it?
It is, May 12th.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo. Okay, so next meeting's May 12th, and then I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, now, good night. Thank you, everyone.